Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Bean Studios for another episode of Creemee Cast Friday at 4. And this is one of the last times we're doing Friday at 4 while the Creemee Stand is still open. So if you haven't been down yet this year, come on down. I got tonight, Saturday, and Sunday. You should come on down, and we'd love to have you here. Actually, we do have a sponsor for today's show. It is 802 Hooligans, and they're hosting their first annual Ride for Awareness, and 100% of the proceeds are going to go to the Josh Pallotta Fund, which is a local charity to end veteran suicide. And the ride's actually going to start here on Sunday. They're going to meet right here at Beans Creemee's, and then they're going to ride down to Randolph, actually. They're going to stop down in our guest territory, and then they're going to make their way over to Williamstown, stop at the Den, and then I believe they're headed to Graham Central down in Montpelier, where there's going to be discounts for riders, and they're going to end their ride at the State House. And once again, this is all going to the Josh Pallotta Fund and to fund Josh's house up in, I believe it's in Colchester, but I might be wrong on that. Do you know? Okay, it doesn't matter.
I bet you're right.
I think it's in Colchester. Yep. Which is, of course, a house for veterans with disabilities, and they have holistic health and all this kind of stuff, and a lot of the new age kind of stuff helping people in different ways. But anyway, so we have a wonderful guest here today, but I just want to say, Guy didn't join us today, so we were feeling a little bit rebellious. We're having a beer with the show, and we even invited a Democrat on our show today. Here he is, Jay Hooper.
Cheers.
Thanks for coming down, Jay.
Thanks, Paul, for having me. I appreciate it. And, Josh Pallotta actually is near and dear to my home, actually, and my heart as well, because I used to serve the Vermont Veteran Cemetery. I was digging, graves over there and doing the maintenance. And his grave site was probably the most commonly visited of all of them, particularly in the C-section.
Well, I actually did not know that you knew anything about it, Jake. Can you share a little bit more with us? Because I actually know limited amount of information. I do know it's the benefit for Sunday.
So, 14th Star Brewery, I think up in St. Albans, right? So I think his family's from the Franklin County area. So I when you said you weren't sure if it was Colchester where they're doing the project, the
house is.
I hadn't heard about that yet, but that makes sense. That probably that region at least. But Josh is a sad story of post-traumatic stress and sort of what people who serve America overseas deal with, and when they come back, sometimes we don't have the services to help make sure that people struggling with what they saw and what they dealt with have an outlet to deal with that properly. And I think in his case, it was his fate was of the saddest possible. And I remember I think it was my first term, probably my second session. I think Laura Sibilia had a handful of military personnel in the house for a resolution of some kind, and I believe Josh, his whole family was there, so it had probably been a Josh Pallotta resolution, and I got the chance to meet and hug his mother, which was heartfelt for me because, I can't remember if it was my first or second term, but I just remember thinking a lot about Josh and what he had probably dealt with, and having spent time around his gravesite, which always had a lot of mementos around it, and we don't like favor one veteran to another, but we made sure to keep track of that one pretty well.
Sure, it sounds like it was definitely one that brought in people, and
definitely.
And I probably should be more clear when I say holistic health. They have gyms at this place, they have acupuncture, they have I think they have ice baths and saunas and this kind of stuff, and it's what this, I think it's what a lot of those guys need more than anything. I know a handful of veterans who come back, and they find outlets, hopefully in positive ways, and I think that's what Josh's house is all about, is providing that for them.
Yeah, sure.
Wellness. So you mentioned your first term. So when was your first term then? Because I know we're not that distant in age, but
how old are you?
I'm 25.
Okay, so I was born in 1993, so I'm 30,
okay.
And I graduated from college in 2016. I went to Connecticut College. I was a double major in history and government. And about 10 days after I graduated in May of 2016, I launched a campaign for the House because, lo and behold, I had remembered January of my senior year which was right at the beginning of 2016, just when the Clinton-Trump showdown was starting to
take off,
kind of take pace, right?
Sure.
Like you know how like we have 30-month presidential races
Yes.
these days. It takes 2.5 years for candidates. It's like a moving economy.
Oh yeah.
At the time, it was still sort of old guard, traditional, modern day politics, where like most people write off political opinion as something that is, extra.
Taboo.
Maybe.
Yeah.
But like now everybody has an opinion about everything.
Yeah.
And almost all of them are like not exactly well-founded or we operate aggressively on misinformation.
Yes.
Or
Yes.
people stay entirely ignorant, like some people did in the past. But in either case, at the time, it was kind of interesting because I remembered when I was a senior in college in January that, in fact, it was in 2012, another presidential election year, when I decided to plant the seed for myself that I would run for public office. There was one day I was sitting at my desk in my dorm room at my boys' boarding school in New York, Trinity Pauling School, where I was having each evening from 7:30 to 9:30 we'd have study hall, and then you'd go to do the things you had to do and then go to bed. I was sitting in study hall, and I remember thinking, based on a course I was taking with my favorite teacher in my high school years, Slade Mead. He was teaching a U.S. history course, or a U.S. government, and he had given us each an assignment to study a U.S. senator. And I was studying Dean Heller, who is a Republican from Nevada. And I remember thinking, like, as I was going through the motions of answering the questions that he had prompted his class with, which were like, if you were him, what would you do to win your reelection?
Sure.
What are like the components that are important to this candidate for their reelection? Like, tell me, knowing nothing, just on instinct, what would you focus on if you were him running for reelection? And every student had a different senator or representative, and I just remember thinking, geez, my father was in the House of Representatives in the 80s, and I've never really explored that very much. Like, I've always, growing up, I would hear him tell stories about his time in the Vermont State Legislature, and he did 4 terms in the 80s and ended up going on for 1 term to become the Secretary of State of Vermont. And so one night in study hall, I'd go Google my father, and I'd realize, geez, this guy's got a decorated,
To be a Secretary of State of the state of Vermont is kind of...
His achievements actually were far more thorough in the House.
I'm sure.
And I'm like, today I remain proud and impressed, and it's a far cry from my lack of I've got nothing to show for, really, because I've been going against the grain most of the time. For reasons of many, and I'll probably detail those.
Yeah, we should get into that for sure.
We'll get into that, but I remember thinking that in 2012 as a senior in high school, like, okay, if this is a presidential election year, one thing I can say that is striking to me is that most people don't talk politics until all of a sudden everybody's buzzing about the presidential candidates, right? Because they become celebrities instantly.
Yes.
And then, like, they become targets of the critique of the masses. And at that time it was still like low key, right? But like today we're ruthless. Like, people are just like going for the neck.
Yes.
And at that time, I had all my peers at an all boys school. They weren't speaking in great substance about what made one candidate better than the other. They were just like talking about the candidates. And it occurred to me that if I were ever to throw my hat in the ring as a newcomer, a no name, it ought to be during one of those presidential election years when people are more politically inclined. Political participation remains today not exactly what we would want it, I think. But
based on how much people are talking about it.
But turnout is certainly higher
than
it used to be. I mean, yeah, I really do wish that people were more responsible about how we talk about the issues and how we engage with each other and how we express ourselves to our to other people, our neighbors, especially if we're representatives to our constituents.
For sure.
We have a problem in government where government actors don't really have to be completely honest. They can, it's not that politicians are liars, it's that they're truth omitters, right?
Yes.
They say a certain percentage of the story,
which is a form of lying.
Right. It's deceit. It's
deceit.
You market a certain angle to a picture, and people believe a certain thing, feel a certain reaction to what it is that you're selling, a message, right? Whatever.
Sure.
And whether that's for an outcome or on some kind of level of defense, either case, what I'd like to see is lawmakers stop spending so much time thanking people for coming, or basically only ever setting up a very certain scripted testimony for to steer towards an agenda. I'd rather see lawmakers facilitate conversation that does not necessarily encourage dissent, but welcome, and it doesn't have to be conflict, but authentic offerings of perspective. Like people in government,
sure,
particularly in the majority, the party in control, are discouraged from saying how they feel about things because it has to be in line with the overall plan.
And so that's something we've talked about before, you and I, outside of this, obviously. But it does seem, going into the legislature, every single session, there's a plan from the beginning. Everybody kind of knows where the cards and chips were going to fall by the end of May.
Not everybody.
Not everybody.
Not even close to everybody.
Okay, but some people seem to know where it's going.
Oh, they know, yeah.
And by June, they're like, okay, these are the bills that we're going to be...
It's like 8 or 12 people, maybe 15 tops.
That know.
They're like, yeah, we're going to... Okay, so last person, for example, last session, which was the worst of the 8 that I've served.
I'm sure there's plenty of reasons why.
There are, but actually the reasons have become fewer at this point because I think that the mechanics of a machine that I think in their eyes runs efficiently, but in my eyes is incredibly dysfunctional, probably yours as well, doesn't need that much more for ingredients.
Yes.
To work. It's a healthy thing for the people who are operating it, and that will remain true. I mean, like I said, there's no such electoral consequence that would probably trade out our supermajority, and unfortunately for Vermonters, a supermajority is an unhealthy concept. It should exist rarely, and when it does, it should be utilized rarely. But instead, right today in Vermont, we have a tendency, lawmakers seem to think of the veto override as a political weapon, when really it's a check and a balance. It's supposed to be used in the instance when, the governor's wrong.
Sure. And
in last session's case, it was the opposite. The governor was right, and like more cases than not.
Sure.
And we kind of went into the session in January with those plans. Like we were thinking, is it going to be 8 or 11 veto overrides that we pursue?
Yeah.
Instead of coming with the cooperative spirit and the mental framework to bring that down to 3, because we decided to work together on the policies and agree on them, and have them pass. Have him sign bills.
Sure.
It should be how do we get our 8 veto overrides down to policies that he's going to sign?
Come up with a workable solution. I will say, when we had our conversation most recently at the State House, one of the most interesting things that you said is that everybody refers to it down here as being kind of a machine, but you don't like that use of the term machine.
You're right. I did say that. I think it's kind of cliche to suggest it's like a political machine, because it's not exactly. There is a framework for the majority to deal success across the map to the participants of this machinery, the mechanics of a functioning system, one that creates outcomes that were sought by the people who fired it up, right?
Yeah.
Like who are fueling it.
Sure.
You know, the ones putting input to create output, right? Very few of us are putting in any input. Very, very few.
It's just a handful.
Not even really. It's like fewer than 10.
Can you put that into perspective, that number? Fewer than 10?
So like you got a lot of new lawmakers who don't know that they are beholden to no other people than the folks who are at home in their district, the people who vote. And it's not only the ones who vote for them. They are, in fact, also beholden to the people who do not support them, because they are obligated to represent all the people in their district.
That's right.
It doesn't have to be like on a one-to-one base, like it doesn't have to be super proportional, but like you can't just write off the Republicans if you're a Democrat, or the other way around.
Sure.
That doesn't make sense, and that's also not right. If you're in government as a senator or a representative and you represent a population, you have to figure out what it is that the population needs from you and from government at large. More importantly, at large. It's this whole like everybody comes with their own personal agenda and they serve the collective agenda of the party in control so as to have a footing to achieve their own personal agenda items. That's not a sustainable concept.
No.
Just the way it's not sustainable for all budgets to grow.
Yeah.
You know, you can't just always have more money thrown into the, like, where does it material, like, that has to come from a certain place, and the place it comes from is
us,
the tax base.
Yeah.
And like that,
the federal government
tends to be the middle class.
Yeah.
In most cases.
So what do you, when you say, like, you're talking about a few of the big players, I mean, you don't have to name names, but could you name names? I mean, is that...
Well, I mean, I think you've got the powers that be, and then you've got the governor, right? Like, you've got, like, the Democrats who are orchestrating the power structure. And those folks are very skilled at keeping a certain profile with the rank and file Democrats. Like, there is little opportunity for upward mobility aside. Well, there's just no, we don't really facilitate robust conversations. We go into the legislative session with a plan that was crafted or scripted, right, by very few people, and is based on the interests of advocates and special interests, moneyed interests. So when we return to the building in January, especially if there's a whole bunch of novice, new, like, know-nothings,
Yes.
they show up with no other idea than, like, I'm supposed to, like, stay in line, not speak too much, not, like, offer too much in the way of opinion, do more observation. I mean, that's basic. Like, that should be the case for anybody joining a new organization. That should be, you got 2 ears and 1 mouth, right? Like that.
Yeah.
Do more listening than you do talking. The people who stand up and speak with authority on every issue end up having almost no credibility, like, just weeks into their service. People are like, oh my God, enough from this person.
Yes.
Please,
Yeah.
please. But there are also, there's not that much for incentive to the leaders to, like, bring on board more people. Like, there's no real reason for them to become more inclusive about how we determine what agenda items we seek, and in what order, how soon, how fast, what style, what the strategy is. If it's working for the people it's serving, why would they change it? And so, like, I think that they've discovered in the last few years that, like, there's not all that much, there aren't very many disruptive variables that would prevent them from continuing to do what they're doing, which is as much as they possibly can on as many things as they can every year.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, that causes for, like, a really bad policy process. It's incredibly diminished. Most committees are made up of lawmakers who are like, what is going on?
Yeah.
Because the chairs have, I don't want to say promises that they are beholden to deliver or what, but there is a lot of like full steam ahead, and then like buy-in comes next. It's like, for me, it would be buy-in first, and then that's the recipe for the successful path of a policy. Whereas, we come to Montpelier in January, and like, let's say there are 8 or 9 interest groups in a committee that go there every day of every session. The representatives, lobbyists of some kind. You've got maybe 5 or 6 of them who got together before the session and created what we call a coalition, right, in that arena. An alliance. And then the other ones who didn't get to like have a piece of the pie just get starved. They're trying to like just figure out a way to get around them all the time, instead of like, let's like invite them for testimony on a very minimal basis, and then like try and kind of, there's just.
Can you give an example of this?
I probably couldn't give you a detailed, and I can't give you an idiosyncratic offer. Like,
this is where I got you.
But like it's just, I think the place to look with that, I think that style of governance came from the environmental activist community. That it's the environmentalists who figured out how effective that is, particularly with this group of lawmakers. You can have a handful of like the Sierra Club and VNRC and
Renewable Energy Vermont.
There's like a whole spattering of different
VPIRG.
Yeah, and there's enough of them that overlap.
Yeah.
In like policy goals that those ones will get together and figure out how to ally.
Sure.
And then the ones who are like not with that end up being like stark enemies of that effort. And Act 250 would be a good policy area
where this started,
where that kind of thing happened.
Okay. Yeah, well, it's funny that you say that. Kenny Gosselin, he's representative here from Northfield, he's a good friend of mine and ours.
Mm-hmm.
And
mine too.
Yeah, he said to me, when I first went into the State House, I literally didn't even know that I was a lawmaker. Like, he literally said, like, I kind of knew about politics. Like, I understood it. It was actually, he got involved back in 2016, too, I believe, back in that time.
I think it was 2018.
Maybe it was 2018, first year that he was there. But he always says, like, I literally, like, he said, like, he literally had somebody explain to him, like, look, like, when the judges make decisions and, like, you guys are the people making the laws based off of, and he said he really didn't quite understand that. And I mean, he maybe that's a little bit embarrassing, but he's very honest about it, and I think that he's not the only one.
He's being modest.
He is being modest.
He's also probably not even letting on. He knew more than
he knew more. I agree. He's being funny. But he also, I think he really didn't know. I mean, I think he didn't know that much.
I mean, that is true. New lawmakers, and you know what? I actually had a leg up because, like I said, my father was like, I had the instincts
embedded into you
for that reason, but I also had the exposure. Like, I had been in the State House all through my, like, growing up. My brother was a page.
Oh, really?
He was like one of Shap Smith's like right hand guys, even at a young age, because like he was really effective. Like, I'll tell you what, the pages, you'll be lucky to get one of them who like you can rely on to like deliver a mess. Like,
I know about pages.
They're just 8th graders are like out to lunch. I'll tell you what.
Yeah.
And it was like yesterday for me. I remember being like la 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 la, but and I didn't have the grades myself to apply to be a page. But my twin brother, he was a very disciplined student, motivated hockey player. He had goals to play Division I college hockey, and he was in hot pursuit of that. And along the way, he got the chance to serve lawmakers as a legislative
pretty cool
page. And so he was somebody who struck up a friendship with the Speaker of the House at the time, and ended up sort of helping him with the redistricting. Because my father, one of his greatest points of pride as the chair of the Government Operations Committee in the 80s was that he got a 150 yes vote approval on his redistricting map. Like he redistricted Vermont.
Wow. Are you talking like reapportionment?
Well, so reapportionment and redistricting are distinctly different. Reapportionment is the thing that prompts redistricting. So like reapportionment is like the math that would have us have to change districts based on population numbers that as they changed, right? And redistricting is the task of the Committee of Government Operations. And now it's military affairs, but it didn't. Back in the day, it was just GovOps.
Okay.
And they are tasked with having to make sure that every district is represented proportionally. Most representatives serve between 4,500 and 5,000 people. If you're in a 2-seat district like I am, Larry Sakowitz and I both represent about 10,000 people. If you're a senator, it's probably about 60 or 65. And so Sam got to learn state government pretty thoroughly as a youngster, and I was a derelict. I was a little derelict at that age. I didn't have the company I kept wasn't particularly productive. I ended up getting kicked out of the Sharon Academy and going to a boys' school in New York, and so I wasn't like prepared to be doing that level of like focused government impact.
Not for you.
Not yet, but
no.
The point of all this is to tell you that, like, I had a leg up when I ran and got elected and came to the state house.
Yeah,
I knew a lot about it that people didn't.
Sure.
Like the day that I was born, my twin brothers Sam and me, our names and there were streamers in the legislative council offices down below the House chamber, because my father at the time was Secretary of State.
Yeah.
And like, they were celebrating our introduction to the world.
It's pretty wild. Yeah, so you kind of knew that you were gonna...
And like, if you go into the State House at the Lincoln statue, and then you walk down the hallway and turn right, and then go up the left-hand stairwell. Yep. At the top of that stairs is a portrait of Governor Phil Hoff. Yep. And that's my namesake.
Really?
Yes. He was... He and my father became friends after he was governor, when my father needed representation on legal matters in his divorce proceedings with his first wife. So it's kind of funny to think like, Governor Phil Hoff and my father became pals, and that's why my first name is Phillip.
That's pretty wild. Yeah, I actually have a Phil Hoff sticker out in the window out there.
Oh, do you?
Yeah, I'll show you later. Yeah, so it's an old one.
And that just gives you some context. So going back to Kenny, he, like other new members, is like, what the heck is going on? And the thing that I'm like thinking is like, even people who have been serving quite a long time in Montpelier today don't actually know exactly all the, like, what's possible in terms of political maneuver and like what there is for potential to create compromise. It's all today about numbers, not relationships.
That's very interesting. I think that's a problem we're seeing across many different parts of life, to be honest, in business.
No, and I think, post-pandemic, we have a really difficult time with like basic social skills. Like, people don't have necessarily the toolkit that they use, that people used to have.
It's funny.
Technology.
It was my first session being there in Montpelier reporting this last year, and I don't know what it was like before, but I kind of know a little bit. I mean, I'd visited down there as a kid, and you've been to the State House a handful of times. I just remember thinking back in those days, like, I don't know, it was kind of like this magic place. Ooh, the State House.
Kind of cool, yeah.
Yeah, kind of cool. Now I'm there, and I'm just like,
oh, this place is awesome.
I'm literally like, what is going on? Like, why is it, like, I literally was like, what is happening in this building?
Yeah. And here's the thing. The lobbying community knows that pretty well, too. And, okay, so unfortunately, it's not just policymakers who are declining in
quality. Sure.
So, too, is the media. I mean, we don't have much of a marketplace in Vermont. Like, it's and particularly as like, our phones are really refining what it looks like for like corporate interests to like harvest.
For sure.
to the max. Like, there's no need for ancillary. Like, newspapers are going.
Yeah.
They're becoming more thin.
That's for sure.
Written media is, in my opinion, the most accurate.
Oh yeah.
Reading information is probably a greater likelihood for accuracy or truth than turning on a talking head.
Sound bites.
Yeah, who just
Sure.
going to deliver. Like, everything is getting more and more divided. So not just policymakers, the media, but also lobbyists. There's so many terrible lobbyists in Montpelier because they're either on the bench and they're going to get paid either way. And like, so Vermont, they used to be referred to as black hats and white hats.
Yes.
Right? Black hats being the ones who represent darker interests, like
Black hats. Is that what you...
like bad,
Yeah.
like bad interests, like things that are sinful or whatever.
Sure.
Like,
the darker side of things. Yes,
things
I understand
that
what you're saying.
Things that are not like considered good
or sustainable.
Yeah. White hats would be like the opposite, right? But today we instead call them advocates. Advocates are the ones who tend to pull or carry water for like not such moneyed interests, but more like goodwill concepts versus like golf courses would be represented by a lobbyist, and
sure.
like trees and like environmental health are represented by advocates.
Well, they're trying to change the definition of what these words are.
Sure. But like the point is that you've got lobbyists of all kinds, and as with everything, there's a spectrum. But like the effective lobbyists in Montpelier are few because there's only a handful who have access, and then all the rest of them are just kind of there to like babysit policies that they have no real impact on. There's so many lobbyists who sit around the edges of the committee rooms and don't ever get to weigh in, and that's for behavioral reasons. Like, some lobbyists don't really take the initiative to figure out who they need to connect to, like what they need to talk about to get to like garner a vote, yes or no, or kind of create action in the way of amendment. But it's like the lobbyists spend most of their time today in the Senate, and I don't blame them because like, why would you lobby a House member? You don't need to.
You know how it's going to go.
Senators are the ones making the laws.
Yep. We
House members are just like, we think we have a plan we think we have a path on some piece of priority that we think we all agreed on, and then like it's like whoever the last minute negotiators are in May, we have to rely on them to deliver, and they don't. We just like don't deliver.
So let's go back to last May then. Coming out of last session, going into the last few weeks, maybe, I don't know the exact dates, but like maybe the last week of the session, where were you at on some of these bills that they were getting ready to like an override session?
Well,
you knew it was going to come. So like, what was it? I think there was like the clean heat standard, the yield bill. I think the renewable energy standard might have been another one of those.
Well, I think that ended up being the same kind of
part of the clean heat standard. Yeah. Okay.
So like the last few weeks of the session, oh man, I was experiencing incredible burnout because like,
yeah, I kind of remember seeing you.
I was struggling last session with my mental health because like you can participate in something, my whole identity as a young person is wrapped up in that state house.
Yeah.
And like I'm watching front row seat with my own eyes, like helplessly, hopelessly, this process just diminish, become more and more fast-paced, underdeveloped, fewer stops to the train, if you will.
Yeah.
So fewer people crafting just creating policy that I, over and over, do not appreciate and do not support. Like people spend a lot of time patting themselves on the back about the great work that we do. It's like, hey, listen, you as a lawmaker ought to have the humility. You should be humble enough to let other people say that when it's proven true.
Yeah.
Don't say it before we've even finished, that we've just we did great work. Don't think about this job as a job and this as work. It's a privilege.
Yeah.
And we're supposed to be solving problems, not signaling virtue. Just
or creating them.
All the time. Just like, look at how great we are. It's like, none of this is great. We're talking about really, really difficult problems. Like, this is not exciting. This is hard work that we need to dig into. It's not supposed to be celebrated. Like, take this seriously. Like, don't always be like, yay.
Yeah.
It's going to be great. It's not. It's really not great for a lot of people.
I guess what I don't understand, and I'm hoping you can speak to this, is the mentality of why do you think that they see it as great? Do you think they take it as like a game? Like, oh, we won, we overrode the governor, Republican, like, is that?
Of course they do.
That's all it is. They don't.
It's worse than that. It's people today see it as a competition for who can prove best and most convincingly that they aren't something that they think other people will think is a bad thing.
Is that what it is?
Yeah, it's a fear of judgment. People, there'll be Democrats who think that it's a bad thing that I came on to Paul Bean's radio program.
Oh, I'm sure there's plenty of them that would.
There'd be ones who say, like, why would you do that? That's stupid.
Yeah.
Like, why? We're going to have a conversation. I'm going to go talk to Paul Bean.
Yeah.
Record it. Like,
well, I think they would.
What's the big deal?
They probably would say that because, I don't know, maybe they're in a different position than you are, but most of them would have something to lose by doing it, but you don't have anything to lose by doing it.
True enough. That is
You know
true.
what I mean?
And that goes back to, so yesterday I had a debate, and somebody afterwards asked me, said, you really are a truth teller. You're somebody, you call yourself a nonpartisan Democrat, and it's true. Like, you are always doing you. You got no leash. Right? Like,
yeah.
Why? How is that? And it occurs to me that it's probably for some of the reasons I was articulating earlier about like how I have a leg up being my father's son and like having exposure to politics from a very young age and all through my childhood. I grew up in a politically inclined family, one that is fairly well connected to the business community and political scene and academia, but also because I didn't ever really take any resources from the Democratic Party. I never took any money. I never bought into their sort of the
platform,
the package that they give a new candidate.
Sure.
The here's how you get elected. I was like, oh, I'm gonna
do my own thing.
Yeah, I know how. I know. Actually, it's funny because when I first I wasn't recruited. when I first ran, the Democrats were like, oh God, I don't know if we want to put our eggs in this basket. This guy's, he's not going to win. Like, right? What the heck? He's like 20. Is he even 20?
Yeah.
I was 22 at the time. And I remember thinking like, well, okay. I mean, maybe I didn't have like a dazzling impression from like, it wasn't love at first sight, but like, why are you being so dismissive or like, why do you assume that I'm going to be a bad candidate for you? And I said to myself, they're going to see that they were wrong about that. And I'm going to go win. And then I'm going to show up. And we'll see what they think. And then I did. And I remember on the very first partisan vote, I voted with the Republicans. It was the question of whether or not we seat Bob Frenier or we pursue a third recount effort. And at the time, I remember Democrats were devastated that Trump won.
Yeah.
So we were all wondering how hard we should pursue this like Russia probe, like did Russian hackers interfere with the election, and like of course it opened the door for like election scrutiny forever, which is too bad, really too bad.
That was part of the start of it.
And I felt in my seat, I was thinking, oh, geez, I'm only 22, so like I don't know anything. I've got no life experience, but my instincts tell me really, really strongly that this is bad politics, because what are we doing? Electioneering at this point? We've had 2 recounts. You have a candidate win by 8 votes. You do a recount, and they still win by 6 votes.
Yeah.
You do another recount, and you manage to chip off one of those votes to a 5-vote margin. Still, that winning candidate prevails. What are we going to do, a third one so as to hope that 5 of those votes are not, like, are we just like going to keep voting until we have a special election?
Yeah.
That sounds to me like electioneering. That sounds like hot, oh my gosh, like hot pursuit of something that is not democratic.
Yeah.
And I'm not with it. So, we've got like this like partisan world, and like the folks at the helm are telling me like shape up, or like you're not going to have a life here. And I'm like, what do you mean? Like, my feelings are that we tried to see if there was any issues with the ballots. We figured out maybe that there were a couple, but like we already tried twice.
Yeah.
Why would we do it again? And then come to find out the next day, room 11, which is today's Appropriations Committee room, which it should not be. That's the room that is the largest, and it should be for caucuses, public caucuses, that as it used to be before you came to Montpelier.
Yeah.
That room was unlocked, and the ballot bags were opened, or one of them at least. So like it was tampered with. So we did not. We did not, like, it was like the headline was like, so what we did was we passed a third recount, but we didn't get to do it because like somebody
did something
up.
to it.
Yeah. And so it was just like hella sketchy. And like, so I'm just like,
dude, this is the shit you can't tell us.
Well,
yeah.
This is like, and then like after, I'm like, okay, well that's all kind of weird and fishy, but like I'm not gonna worry about it. But the point is that partisanship is way too out of hand today, and like it's not okay with me that like Democrats would judge me for having the governor's endorsement.
Are they upset with you about it?
I mean, I'm sure there are ones who are talking trash behind my back, but like I guess I'm not really worried about it. Like it's not something that I don't really care about the opinions of like my charged up colleagues. Like I think that they're wrong if they care about that stuff. I want to work with people who are here to do work, not worry about what team everybody's on, and who, like it's like just spend your time thinking about not just Vermonters, but like most importantly like children. Like how do we educate children proportionally? Like that's the number one thing that I care about as a lawmaker is fixing public education, saving it.
Yeah, thanks for getting back into that subject.
But we spend so much time worrying about all these ancillary issues like white noise. And I think that other issue too is like we don't have any accountability factor. We can deliver non-outcomes and nothing changes except for the potential for a system to fail. Yeah. And like I don't even think that there are very many lawmakers who really feel like a thirst or a hunger to prevent that.
Do you think that it's going to fail?
Which one? That one?
The education system?
I do.
You think it's going to end this session, or
no? I think it'll be a couple years, but I think it will die a slow and painful death, and we'll be in no other position than to allow for private interests to come and buy up our school system, and like we'll be a charter school state because we can't follow through on our constitutional commitment to free and fair public education.
I was going to say, even though it is a constitutional commitment.
The most important one of them.
Yeah, and it's falling by the wayside. So your thoughts on that? I mean, from what I understand is over the past 10 years, they've done like 38 studies on the education system.
Yeah, I think this was the 39th.
And they've come up with some fixes in that, or...
You could argue that there were fixes that were overlooked.
And so where are we at with that now? I mean, is that... I know it's a silly... Everybody kind of knows where we're at with it, with the property tax increase, but where are we at with that now? How do you fix that?
Well...
Is it in those studies? Is it,
It could be. It could be... those studies could be like riddled with key pieces of solution, like it's possible that between all those studies we have the information we need to like come up with a solution, but it's an incredibly layered and complex and extremely controversial in each of these layers.
Oh yeah.
Education is one of these subject matters, right? Like this is like one of these areas of it's like a topic that people feel very strongly philosophically about, ideologically, and historically, right? So today we have all these different special interests viciously guarding a corner of some like many-sided object, right? Like, so like the teachers, the superintendents, the principals, school boards, parents.
Yeah.
Right? Everybody has like their own group representing acutely their interests, and like unfortunately it means that like nobody's really coming to compromise. They're all coming to not.
They want what they want.
Well, it's not even that they want stuff. It's what it's what they don't want to happen.
I see.
It's things that they don't want to change. And so like my argument has been that we need to create a very constant and transparent and uncomfortable, like really uncomfortable roundtable discussion where everybody shows up planning to give something up.
What can you give up, folks?
Right.
Yeah.
But like, what do we all think we each need to give up? Like, we should all agree on the things that we like. We need to make a really concerted and difficult effort to make modern our education landscape. And what that means is that we ought to be thinking about the future of public education at a minimum on a 10-year basis. Like, we should be building a 10-year plan with a 3 to 5 year transition away from what we're doing now, the expensive thing, towards something that is an investment regionally in other services. So like community schools. You familiar with the concept? Basically, it's wraparound services that start at the LEA, the local educational agency.
Okay.
The place where families all have to send their offspring, their next generation, right? And families that need hygienic resources and, clothing and like food.
Yeah.
Things that like people in poverty would need assistance with could get from that place where they send their child every single day. And then coupled with that would be maybe some basic health care, dental hygiene.
Sure.
Right? Like the things that keep people's wellness healthy.
Yeah.
Infrastructure, like we see today, our newest crisis is in healthcare, right? Like the healthcare costs are...
Which is the big driver for the education costs. One of the big drivers.
You could say that, but the hospitals would disagree. They would say, yeah, it's true that healthcare costs go up every year, but like not it's pretty consistent. It's usually 4.5%.
Okay. Every year.
Yeah. And so that's not exactly the cost driver. It's like incremental and constant, but like the thing that is costly, well, we've got like, there's a million cost drivers in education, but like our problem today is that we've removed any sense of cost containment. And before there wasn't even that much. It was like categorical, I guess, but like what we need to do is figure out how school districts spend money and create rules about how they're supposed to.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not like can get into like rumors or whatever, but I have heard things of just like complete, I mean, corruption is probably the right word.
Oh, well, of course you got embezzlement on all.
There's all sorts of stuff that I don't think we know exactly how our school money is being spent in each district. We don't know. I mean, I'm not going to like start raffling off a point that people have made to me recently, because a lot of people come here and tell me stuff about their school district, for example. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, well, I don't know if that's true. I can't really say, but there's been certain points that have been made where it's just like chunks of money, nobody knows how it's being spent.
Right. And that's it. It's not so much like the mystery of how money is spent. It's more like the lack of guidelines. We should have expectations in every different, textbooks and schools construction, like deferred maintenance. Like, unfortunately, we have this new obsession with PCBs and like contaminants. Lead remediation was important, but then we were like, okay, now we got to do radon. And it's like, okay, why are we going to start taking all these buildings that need to be... We have like $750 million in deferred maintenance costs for school construction. Like,
I heard it's more.
I mean, that was just me trying to...
I think it's more.
The last time I checked, it was 600, and like I was just...
Oh, you know what? It is. I think you're right. It's 6.
I think it's 6, but like I was just trying to be like, okay, it's huge. It's an enormous amount, like, and it's an amount that we can't just like all of a sudden dole out that money, particularly because like, let's say we end up closing 2/3 of the schools in Vermont, which is like 300. I don't know. Let's say it's 350 or thereabouts. We should start with high schools.
Yeah.
Because they're more expensive.
Yes.
Particularly also because like elementary schools are far more like heart of the community.
For sure.
Whereas like high schools are multifaceted, that like they engage with many other communities.
Absolutely. Yeah.
If there's a high school that's going to be more costly to fix than to rebuild, that school should be demolished.
Yeah.
That's one. Like,
that's where you start.
We probably have 25 schools that are past the point. Oh, what was Jill Briggs Campbell telling me earlier? She gave me an acronym about like an index that you use to analyze the longevity of like a vehicle or a building. It was something. A 3-letter acronym, but the point is that there's a way to like figure out if it's worth fixing the thing that you rely on, or trading it in for a new replacing it. I think that we know about 25 schools in Vermont that are at that point. And I asked her, what is the second tier and how many schools do you think would be like next on the list for like approaching that point of no reinvestment? And she said, I don't know, probably like 2/3 of them. And I said, I would figure there maybe is an opportunity there to like do some hard work and like say, okay, all these schools, we're going to sunset the functionality of that place and that one because we're building this one for all the students in each of the 3.
Well, and to your point too about the high schools, when you do that, you open them up to more opportunities. When you open up the size of the schools, like I agree with you completely. The elementary schools are like the core of the community. That's really intimate between parents, teachers, other the community members. But the high schools, I mean, I went to Northfield High School here, and I graduated with 32 kids. And I mean, I'm not complaining. I loved my high school experience. I wouldn't change it for the world. But I don't know. What was I exposed to, really? I mean, I don't know. It wasn't bad, but it's small, And a lot of kids, they go down to Randolph Tech because they had that opportunity to go do something there. I wasn't interested in it, but, like we definitely needed more avenues, different curriculum offered. That's I think a solution too. And then you are right. When you look at the cost of actually building these new schools, I mean, I don't think there's any question that they're not going to go in and rebuild all these schools. They're going to start closing schools.
Well, and the thing that we have to do, I think, is like figure out if there's a bunch of schools in a region that all should close, as opposed to being some incredibly costly like savior effort for ones that will end up closing in that like anyway.
Yeah. Down the pipe, they definitely
6 years
will.
From now, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's the reality. Yeah.
It is. And like we don't like using words like consolidation because like that's scary and more exciting and sort of evocative, like one of the policy issues that are most controversial to Vermonters are around consolidation of schools.
Yeah.
More so than like the Second Amendment or abortion. It's people get really fired up about government telling them whether or not their age-old school will have to close. That's something that people don't want to be told. So the legislature in recent history decided not to tell them, but to make them decide themselves.
Yeah.
Which is arguably worse.
Yeah, I mean, now they're forcing the issue, which I mean, I don't know. I think when I look at it, there had to be people that have known for a long time that this was coming and maybe even geared it a certain direction.
Well, I think that the architects of that consolidation effort, Act 46, back in, 2014 or whatever year it was, they didn't exactly map out the second, third, fourth leg of the plan. We had no real continuity of policy strategy that would ensure that we were going to realize savings. Instead, so as to protect the marginal political will that they needed to pass the policy in the first place, they created all these off-ramps, which communities utilized. And now you've got fractured communities that will probably never recover.
Yeah.
Like districts, like one town to another, they're like, we hate them.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And like those
Berry
places,
City, Berry Town.
I mean, I'm not sure about that exactly, but like, I think of like Ripton, or I think of like, I guess I don't, Roxbury I represent.
Oh, God.
Roxbury is like the pet project for Montpelier, and they're like, we're going to take them under our wing, but only for a certain amount of time, and then like that time elapsed, and then Roxbury's like, well, what now? And then like Montpelier's like,
well, you're closed.
Like, well, yeah.
Like,
what do you want?
And we're going to sell your building, by the way, that your townspeople paid for and built.
So it's incredibly messy, difficult work that has like no direction. It's got ambiguous goals, but like we don't exactly have a very well paved or mapped path.
I think the idea of shutting schools down and rebuilding larger ones actually isn't that unpopular an idea. I mean, I've heard Governor Scott talk about that, and he's America's most popular governor, so I mean, there must be something to that, right?
Yeah, I think what it is that's the reality that Vermont has a lot of systems that are in decline and actually in financial crisis, right? Like nearing collapse. Like, I mean, the Vermont State College system was like 5-6 weeks away from financial solvency.
Right now?
No, back when the pandemic happened.
Oh,
sorry, I don't mean to start.
Whoa, what?
But we dug into that work and fixed it, right? Like, well, at least for the time being. Like, we did a consolidation effort there, right? That is happening on more than 2 major levels, which, in my opinion, is actually an opportunity to really like synthesize policy. Like, if we're going to talk about housing, it has to be to facilitate workforce development in tandem with saving public education, as we discuss where we build what size schools for how many communities, based on the geography, socioeconomic status, age, like the demographic issues that would have us struggling to keep small rural hospitals open, right? Or having a Oliver Wyman report that says like these hospitals need to adapt in these ways for these dollar figures to translate. It's like, okay, this is all based on the assumption, right, that Vermont's population will continue to or only decline.
Yeah.
I think that it has to increase, and I think that it will. And I plan to try and contribute to policy efforts that will facilitate that reality. But it should be like I'm saying is like we should be thinking on a 10-year basis as we think about saving these systems, and think about them to like parallel to each other, so that like this housing policy is facilitating this workforce development policy, which is allowing for these hospitals to get the doctors and nurses that they need in these areas, and therefore, this number of families have this amount of students going to these schools.
That is kind of the main driver of a lot of these issues, isn't it? Is population.
Yeah, and like our per pupil spending analysis is based on a lack of students and an abundance of instructors, and fewer and newer is a term you hear in the legislature.
Fewer and newer.
Fewer and newer. Fewer schools, newer schools.
Interesting.
We should be investing in quality, as we think about like what do Vermont youth deserve.
Yep. No, I think that's great. Jay, we've been going for about an hour here. I'm sure there's plenty more that we could talk about, and maybe we might have to again sometime in the future.
We're good. We did it.
We did do it, and
Nice.
I just wanted to ask, one quick question before we wrap up here. So as you're going around campaigning, talking to people, what's the big issues that you're hearing from folks? We probably already covered it, but
I mean, it's like again, as with every other year. I mean, when I first ran in 2016, it was not. Everybody said the same thing, which was like affordability, but like specifically property taxes. And I remember thinking like, there'd be people who say, "Look, I'm a Democrat," or whatever, but like I need you to understand, as like the new Democrat running for the seat, I need you to tell the Democrats that like property taxes are too high and they can't keep going up. And what have we done? We've allowed them to go up, and then we let them skyrocket.
Yeah.
That's absurd to
and
me.
they keep doing it.
I voted for a policy to update the public, our funding formula, to create new variables that would make it more equitable, because that's the right thing to do. On the basis of like, part of that policy was a study, the 38th presumably, about transitioning to an income-based, derivative of resource, like how we get what we need. We didn't implement that. They say they discussed it. I didn't really see that, but people are upset with our lack of action on the things that they've been talking about for like all the years that we've been not doing it. And like, you can sit there and say we're in no other position because of inflation and all these other like economic variables that would have things be more expensive. Always things are going to be more expensive every year. Sure. But like, that doesn't change the fact that you have to like dig into the levers of the math and figure out which ones are bad and tweak them or remove them. And so like, I'll tell you this. On the 4th of July, walking in the parade, I was telling my district mate, Larry Sackowitz, you maybe wouldn't know this because you haven't walked in as many of these parades as I have, but I can tell you that these folks being quiet right now and not clapping for us, that's an expression of resentment in itself, and it's because of the property tax increase. Yeah.
Because it was right around that time. Yeah.
Well, and then our property tax bills came out last week, and like, people were like, what the? And like, a lot of people were like, oh, mine didn't go up that much, it's not so bad. But it's the principle, it's the fact that we allowed it to be what it was, and said, oh, the governor's gonna let it go up 20% if we don't do what we're doing.
Yeah.
That's not true.
It's deceitful.
It's not correct.
Yep.
It's either the people saying that don't understand what they're talking about, or they're lying.
That's true too. I think a lot of the time people, maybe they don't know exactly what they're saying, and
that's
that's what they've heard.
I'm not gonna hold it again. Like,
no.
There's plenty of times that I'm talking about something, not like with authority, but I might be like saying things that are maybe not complete.
Sure.
Because there's somebody out there who's like, no, I know more about that, and he's not exactly representing that issue completely, which is fine. But like, on this one, it's so complicated that like, we ought to do a lot more in the way of like making sure that lawmakers understand the issue.
Sure.
Because like, let me just part with this. Local control doesn't exist. And policymakers will continue to argue with me about that. They'll tout that, oh no, it's of course voters are voting on these budgets. They're the ones who are approving it. And I'm like, that's true. But that doesn't mean that they're controlling anything about the process. There's literally only an opportunity for voters, if there are enough of them, to come in on the same day of the year to vote no. And that's one day.
That's it.
After the dollar figure has been established, to say we reject this dollar figure, go back and create a different one, presumably a lower one.
Yeah.
Even if they do that 15 times, their property tax rates are still impacted by all kinds of external variables. No two districts aren't competing for resources that are not infinite, right? Like we the legislature, receive a bad math equation that we can't argue with, and then we set a property tax rate statewide based on that bad math, and then deal it out to all districts. So you in your district voted down your school budget over and over and over and over, but your property tax will still go up.
Yeah.
That's not control.
No, because it's tied to
nothing.
Yeah.
Control nothing.
It's tied to legislature.
The people in control are the 5 or 8 or 10 school board members, business managers, superintendents, school administrators who crafted that budget.
Yep.
So, anyway, thanks, Paul.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for coming down, Jay. It was a blast. I'm sure we definitely, like I said, we can talk about more, and we should sometime. However, we definitely need to wrap this up. I got to open up the Creemee stand.
Oh, good for you, yeah.
Thank you so much for coming again. Everybody out there tuning in right now, thank you so much for watching. If you are not a subscriber already to the Vermont Daily Chronicle, you should become one for just 30 cents a day. Support free speech here in Vermont. And, we've had a few stories make some national noise lately, so we're quickly becoming a source for free speech and a microphone to the rest of planet Earth. I say that kind of joking, kind of not. So if you're not already a subscriber, you should subscribe for just 30 cents a day, $9 a month, or support us in any way that you can. Once again, thanks so much for tuning in, everybody.